Welcome to the Pod Like a Pro podcast.
This is a podcast dedicated to sharing tips, tricks, personal experiences to help you to podcast like a professional.
I'm Nat.
And I'm Liz.
And we're from Pod and Pen Productions.
And we're coming to you from Awabakal country.
So this podcast is going to be some advice and tips and tricks from you and I, Liz. And then every second episode, we're going to do something a bit different.
Yeah, so every second episode, we're going to talk to somebody who has started a podcast or perhaps has been podcasting for a really long time. So we're getting those ideas and insights from people at different stages of the journey. And a lot of those people are going to be people that we have worked with at some stage or at some point, so we can talk to them about how they're going.
And it really gives you an insight into how people just like you who are listening right now can actually make a podcast and make a podcast that actually connects to an audience and really sounds professional.
Yeah, because I find, Nat, that when if you're thinking about starting a podcast, there are so many little speed bumps along the way that can actually just stop you in your tracks. And so I guess part of this podcast is to try and give people the tools and the tips to get over those speed bumps.
And the confidence as well. That's a big thing we'll be talking about over this podcast series.
Yes. So in this very first episode, we are going to talk about the main reasons to start a podcast.
Yeah, so you've been thinking about making a podcast for a while. You've been wondering if putting yourself out there and committing all the time it takes to make a podcast is worth it. So why should you podcast?
Yeah, really good question, actually. And I also want to talk in a moment about why you shouldn't podcast, because probably just as important.
Yeah, because there can be reasons not to do a podcast. And we don't want to get negative. We just want to be realistic here because you can make a podcast for those reasons, but they may not be enough reason for you to have a podcast that you dream of.
Because it's a lot of work. So Nat, tell me, what are some of the main reasons you think people should actually start a podcast?
Well, I think firstly, if you have a passion to share your knowledge, a real drive, a real fire to share your knowledge, interest, or authentic perspective with people who will resonate with, I think that's a really great reason to do it.
And I feel like that sort of leans into that idea of having really interesting conversations with really interesting people and perhaps people you wouldn't normally have access to, because once you've got a podcast, you can say, hi, would you like to come on my podcast? Amazing person that I've always looked up to that I'd really like to get to know better.
So yeah, it's a great reason. It's a great second reason, because if you're really wanting to connect with people and meet new people and actually it's great to you go right to the person that you admire, right to the person who you think is doing things that you would like to do similar things to. You can speak to them directly, and that's a great reason to do a podcast.
Yeah, and another reason, which I think it also speaks into those, is to elevate your reputation, because we have this thing that people like to bandy about called thought leadership. And whilst it can be just a trendy sort of term, it does stand for the people that are the ones making the noise in your industry, and you can be that by starting a podcast.
And I think the thing is that you may already be a thought leader. It's just nobody knows that you're there.
So you're saying you've got good thoughts, but you're not sharing them.
You've got great thoughts and you've got great leadership potential, and you know it, but it's just the courage to step out there and go, you know what? In my field, I feel that I've got something to offer. I've got something to share. I've got something that will genuinely help people. And that's a great reason to start a podcast, because it builds the knowledge that you're actually there, so you're no longer hiding your light under that bushel.
And now another reason could be that you want to use it as a marketing tool, and we will get into reasons not to start a podcast in a moment, which leads into that as well. But creating a podcast is a wonderful opportunity to create unique content that nobody else has. You're not jumping on any bandwagon. You're actually creating unique content by having conversations with people that you can then repurpose into all your different areas of marketing, whether that be social media, newsletters, blogs, video, whatever it is. You can take that unique content and repurpose it across a wide variety of things.
because podcasts are like a content generating powerhouse, because you think podcasts are conversations usually. And so conversations go in all different directions, and you can talk about a lot of different things. And there's a lot of, I mean, you want to be focused on the main thing that you're talking about, but those gems, those quotes, those insights that you didn't realize you were going to get that really can help other people. You can just mine your podcast for that kind of content.
Can you start a podcast just because you think it'll be fun?
Yeah, you can start a podcast because you think it'll be fun. But I think you need to start a podcast because your fun connects to people and that you use your fun to help people. Mm-hmm. I think it's thinking about the end product and how it's going to interact with your audience. And
so audience-focused fun.
Audience-focused fun.
Awesome.
I mean, does that sound like fun?
Yeah, that sounds like fun.
It sounds like fun.
So what are the big reasons not to start a podcast?
Well, I think the biggest reason not to start a podcast is because you want $1 million a year from being a successful podcaster on YouTube.
Right. So we're not starting a podcast because I want to be the next, Diary of a CEO, Joe Rogan / whoever else, the Imperfects, if you're an Australian audience. Although that would be nice.
That would be great.
It could happen.
You know what? Geez, if that happened, I wouldn't mind. But as your sole purpose of starting a podcast, that's not a good one, because that's probably not very likely to happen, and that will just make you sad.
It will make you sad. You need better reasons to start the podcast.
Yes, you do need better reasons.
And then see where it goes. I think another good reason not to start a podcast is because you think you're really funny with your friends.
Yeah.
Like, just leave that to Saturday night.
How many times do you hear that? You hear people go, hey, you're in podcasting. Oh, my God. I was only talking to my friend the other day because we have such fascinating conversations that we need to start a podcast.
And look, if you want to record yourselves and then laugh back at it, that's fine. But it probably also isn't a reason to start. I guess we're talking about professional sounding podcasts.
Yes, we are.
Podcasts that are going to be used for something. So don't do it just because you think.
If you want a podcast that has purpose, that has listeners, maybe 2% of the population might find. I'm really sorry. I hope this isn't breaking any harsh reality to you, but the likeliness is that what you find funny with your friends is very in-house, and so that's probably not a great reason to start a podcast.
And there's also great tips that you can have, because I think we need to also focus on the fact that podcasting is a skill.
Yes.
A lot of people, as you say, everyone can talk, so they think that they can do the podcast, but the podcasting itself, the interviewing, the creating something that is funny but not in-house, there's a skill to that, and that can be taught. So that's a really good thing.
It can be taught and it can be practiced. And the only way that you really can nail it is by doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it. So so that's yes. So that's another reason not to do a podcast. I think another one is that you want 1,000 downloads and listeners, so you can monetize your podcast.
Which could happen, but it's not going to happen in the immediate. So I think, we always talk about that if you're going to start a podcast, give yourself a time frame where you say, no matter what the outcome, I'm going to continue this podcast for this long, because you need to practice, and you need to see the process, and you need to see where it's going to go, and it will take time. It's not an overnight success type of thing. It's
like, you think about the first time that you ever learned to swim. You weren't swimming a 50-meter freestyle race, were you? It's like that, and I think the reason to not start a podcast is just unrealistic expectations. But I think the thing with all these reasons, if you are resonating with any of the reasons not to start a podcast, all it takes is just a little bit of thought to think of the other reasons of why you want to start the podcast. As you talk about, Liz, it's your big why.
Yeah, your big why. And once you work out that big why, then everything else falls into place, the why and the who. So why are you doing this, and who are you talking to? And once you've got that, And the idea that you can experiment and you can try new things, as long as you're letting your listeners, your audience know, you're being audience focused, then that's a great thing. And so they're things that we're going to get into as we go through this podcast, the Pod Like a Pro podcast.
Yes, yeah, and really looking forward to sharing with you the knowledge that we have from our experience and the work that we do with people, and also hearing those stories from people who've just like people listening who want to do this and have done it.
Exactly. I think there's a lot to be learned from people who are just a few steps ahead. So if you do want to learn more about podcasting, you can sign up to our newsletter and read about our Pod Like a Pro podcasting course at podandpen.com.au. Until next time, happy listening.